No one ever imagined that the woman who embodied strength, elegance, and unmatched talent on screen was quietly crumbling behind the curtain. Meryl Streep, hailed as Hollywood's eternal queen, had the world at her feet. But what if everything you knew about her, the grace, the laughter, the wisdom, was only half the story? For decades, she stood tall in front of flashing lights, giving life to characters that shook our souls. But what the cameras never caught was the unbearable silence she returned to. Behind every award speech was a suppressed cry. Behind every standing ovation, a personal sacrifice too heavy to carry alone. How could someone so revered, so celebrated, feel so invisible in her own life? Beneath the spotlight's glow, Meryl carried a grief that never... Before Meryl Streep became the face of 1,000 unforgettable roles, she was just a quiet little girl in the small town of Bernardsville, New Jersey, a place that rarely made room for dreamers. Born Mary Louise Streep in 1949, Meryl grew up in a household that appeared ordinary on the outside, but was emotionally silent on the inside. Her father, a pharmaceutical executive, was distant, practical, methodical. Her mother, while loving in bursts, often faded into the background, battling her own shadows of self-doubt and societal restraint. In interviews, Meryl would later say, "My mother never chased her dreams, so instead, she made mine feel foolish." As a child, Meryl wasn't told she was beautiful. She wasn't told she was special. She was taught to blend in, to behave, to be clever, but not too clever. She wore thick glasses, had frizzy hair, and often went unnoticed in school hallways. She didn't mind the silence, but it carved into her a deep need to be seen, not for her looks, not for perfection, but for who she was beneath the surface. In family gatherings, while the boys were encouraged to speak loudly, Meryl was often told to lower her voice, to act more ladylike, to not interrupt. And so, she listened, observed, watched human behavior the way a scientist watches a test tube silently, intensely, with growing curiosity. It would later become her superpower as an actress, but back then, it only made her lonelier. There was one place where she came alive, the mirror. Not out of vanity, but out of desperation. As a young girl, she would mimic accents, faces, voices, anything, to escape her own reflection. She became other people because being herself felt too invisible. One of her earliest teachers once told her, "You have a face that could disappear in a crowd." Meryl remembered that sentence for decades, not with bitterness, but with quiet determination. "If I couldn't be seen," she once said, "I would make them feel me instead." Her teenage years weren't easier. She was the kind of girl boys didn't notice until she changed her hair and ditched the glasses. But even then, the praise felt conditional. It wasn't her mind, her soul, her essence. They liked it, was the performance she gave them. So she leaned into it, unknowingly rehearsing for the biggest stage of all, life. She hid her sadness behind sarcasm. She wore a smile that said, "I'm fine," while her eyes begged, "See me, really see me." She never let the pain show because she was terrified it would make people leave or worse, not care. And yet, in the quiet of her bedroom, she would write poetry. Deep, aching words about longing, about masks, about not belonging. In one of her notebooks, found years later by a biographer, Meryl Streep didn't walk into Hollywood like a storm. She crept in like a whisper, quiet, deliberate, but impossible to ignore. After years of feeling unseen, she enrolled at Vassar College. It wasn't because someone told her she'd be great. It was because she had nothing to lose. In that liberal arts sanctuary, Meryl found something she never had before: a stage, a script, and a silence that finally listened. The first time she performed publicly, it wasn't grand. It wasn't even memorable to most. But for her, it was like breathing for the first time. She played Juliet in a small production, and when the final bow came, the applause didn't just fill the room, it filled the hollowness inside her. She was addicted. But love for acting didn't mean the world would embrace her. After Vassar, she pursued a master's degree at Yale School of Drama, one of the most prestigious yet soul-crushing environments imaginable. At Yale, Meryl wasn't the star student. In fact, she often felt misunderstood. One professor infamously told her, "You'll never make it. Your face isn't right for film." That comment, sharp, dismissive, would have crushed someone else. But Meryl? She turned it into armor. She studied relentlessly, not to be famous, but to be good. She explored Greek tragedy, Shakespeare, Brecht, anything that forced her to shed her skin and crawl into someone else's. She mastered voices, dialects, movements, emotion. But the price? Her health? Her confidence? Her sense of identity? She once joked, "At Yale, I cried so much I should have gotten another degree in weeping." But behind the humor was exhaustion. The emotional toll of becoming someone else over and over again left her wondering if there would be anything left of her when the curtain fell. Then came 1975, the year that changed everything. She was cast in a Broadway production called 27 Wagons Full of Cotton by Tennessee Williams. It wasn't a major hit. Critics were mixed. But in the audience sat a casting director from Universal Pictures. That night, Hollywood took its first real look at Meryl Streep, and they couldn't stop looking. Her first film role was a small part in Julia, 1977, where she appeared alongside Jane Fonda. It was brief but powerful. The camera didn't love her the way it loved conventional starlets. It respected her. It lingered on her eyes. It listened when she spoke. But just as her career began to rise, tragedy struck. Her partner, the brilliant actor John Cazale, known for The Godfather and Dog Day Afternoon, was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. Meryl had just started filming The Deer Hunter, her breakthrough role. But she was also watching the love of her life wither away. Every day, she would leave set with an Oscar-worthy performance behind her and enter a hospital room with quiet tears and a heart that couldn't act anymore. John died in 1978. He never got to see her become the Meryl Streep we all know. That grief could have ended her career before it ever began. Instead, she channeled it and poured it into her roles. Her performance in Kramer vs. Psy. Kramer, the following year, was fueled by real loss, and it won her the first of many Oscars. But the victory was bittersweet. By the 1,980 seconds, Meryl Streep was no longer a rising star. She was the North Star, the one every actress, every director, every awards committee looked up to. And yet, with every role that lifted her higher, her soul grew heavier. She became known for disappearing into characters. Whether it was the anguished mother in Sophie's Choice, the tormented lover in The French Lieutenant's Woman, or the iron-willed Margaret Thatcher in The Iron Lady, Meryl didn't act, she became. Every glance, every breath, every tremor of her voice felt like truth incarnate. Hollywood couldn't get enough of her. The world bowed before her talent. The accolades never stopped. 3 Academy Awards, 21 nominations, a record. Critics called her the finest actress of her generation. Directors begged for her. She became a symbol of mastery, discipline, and transformation. But inside, Meryl was exhausted. To the outside world, she lived a dream. But dreams can be prisons when you're not allowed to wake up. In interviews, she often downplayed her own genius, a defense mechanism to keep the world from seeing the wear and tear underneath. The expectations were suffocating. Audiences didn't want Meryl. They wanted miracles. They wanted the chameleon, the goddess, the legend. They never asked if she was okay. She once confessed in a rare, off-camera moment, "It's strange. People see me cry on screen and think they know me, but they never see me when the camera cuts." Fame had gifted her the world but robbed her of privacy, peace, and at times even identity. She had children, a loving husband, a life beyond the studio gates. But the industry didn't care. It demanded more. More films, more premieres, more interviews. Even when she was at home, Hollywood called whispering scripts, chasing performances, expecting perfection. She couldn't walk through an airport without being analyzed, couldn't express an opinion without headlines twisting it, couldn't age without cruel speculation. For every standing ovation, there were 10 critics asking, "Is she still relevant?" Even her peers, at times, resented her. She was too good, too consistent, too admired. There was jealousy masked as praise, isolation masked as respect. Behind closed doors, the pressure took its toll. Sleep became fragmented. Anxiety, a constant hum. She once admitted, "Sometimes I stare in the mirror and wonder who I am without a role to play." That's the tragedy no one talks about. When your own name becomes a character, you're forced to perform. And yet, she never stopped. Because she believed that every role, no matter how draining, had the power to heal someone. And in healing others, maybe she could patch the parts of herself that fame had slowly eroded. But the cost? It was never light. In pursuing greatness, Meryl sacrificed stillness. In becoming a symbol, she risked losing herself. She had everything except peace. While the world applauded, Meryl Streep was quietly unraveling. To millions, she was the gold standard, a force of nature in every role. But to Meryl, there were nights when even getting out of bed felt like walking through fire. Fame, at first, had been a tool, then a responsibility, and eventually, a burden. The older she became, the more invisible she felt in an industry obsessed with youth. Scripts stopped arriving the way they used to. Producers whispered about fresh faces and new energy. Suddenly, the woman once crowned the Queen of Hollywood was treated like a relic of the past. It was a betrayal she never saw coming. But that wasn't the worst part. What truly broke her wasn't Hollywood's fickleness. It was loss, quiet, devastating loss that no camera could capture. In the early 2000s, Meryl lost her best friend and longtime collaborator, Carrie Fisher. They had shared something rare in Hollywood: honesty without ego. When Carrie died suddenly in 2016, Meryl delivered the eulogy and then disappeared for weeks. A close friend later said, "She wasn't just mourning Carrie. She was mourning the years, the memories, the woman she used to be with her." That same year, her daughter faced a serious health crisis, details never made public, but devastating enough that Meryl put her career on hold. For months, she sat by hospital beds, made meals in silence, and prayed into the darkness. It was a side of her no one knew. The performer, the icon, stripped down to a mother who was terrified. She once confessed in a quiet interview, "I can survive critics. I can survive aging. But watching someone I love suffer, that's when I feel powerless." Then came the backlash. The one moment Meryl, always measured and elegant, dared to speak truth to power. At the 2017 Golden Globes, she used her acceptance speech to speak out not about herself, but about the state of America, about compassion, about integrity. And in doing so, she became a target. She was called out, ridiculed, politicized. News outlets spun her words. Trolls flooded her inbox. Powerful men in Hollywood, the very ones she had once worked beside, turned cold. The weight of speaking up was immense. But silence, to her, was worse. And behind it all, a darker truth lingered. For years, Meryl had harbored guilt, the kind that doesn't fade with time. She had once worked with Harvey Weinstein, the man who would later be exposed as a predator. Though she had no part in his crimes and never personally experienced his abuse, the fact that she had unknowingly been part of that system haunted her. When the Me Too movement exploded, Meryl stood with survivors. But the guilt stayed. Quiet. Deep. She said, in an interview, "I wish I had known. I wish I had seen. I wish I had done more." It was the first time the world saw her voice waver. And, in that moment, Meryl Streep, the unshakable icon, looked human, vulnerable. Not because she failed, but because she felt. Because she carried the pain of others as if it were her own. This was the cost of her empathy. This was the tragedy no one scripted for her. Not a scandal. Not a downfall. But the slow erosion of trust in an industry she had given her life to, and the heartbreak of realizing that being a good person, even a great one. There came a moment quiet, unnoticed by the world, when Meryl Streep simply stepped back. Not with a grand farewell, not with headlines, but with a whisper to herself. It's time to live, not perform. She didn't vanish. She just stopped chasing. The roles became fewer, the press appearances selective, and slowly, she built something more sacred than a career, a life. Meryl began spending more time at her farmhouse in Connecticut. There, among tall trees and untouched earth, she found something that Hollywood had never offered: peace without applause. She cooked for her family. She read poetry in the mornings. She sat by the fire and allowed herself, for once, to just be Meryl. Not the character, not the icon, not the myth. It wasn't retirement. It was reclamation. For decades, she had given voice to women the world ignored. Now, she gave that voice to herself. She started choosing projects not for prestige, but for purpose. In Let Them All Talk, 2020, she played a writer, confronting her past, a mirror of her own introspection. She joined Don't Look Up, not for the spotlight, but for the message. She declined dozens of roles that didn't resonate with her spirit. And behind the camera, she poured her energy into causes that had long stirred her soul. Women's rights, environmental protection, arts education, refugee aid. But she didn't do it for headlines. She did it quietly, the same way she had endured pain, privately, but with unwavering resolve. In a rare interview, when asked what legacy she wanted to leave, she paused, then simply said, "I hope my work helped someone feel seen. That's all I ever wanted, for others to feel what I didn't when I was young." That was her healing. Not a comeback, not a victory lap, but a return to the girl who once felt invisible. And finally, telling her, "You matter," even without the spotlight. Her children, now grown, speak of her not as a legend, but as a fiercely present mother. Her husband, Don Gummer, with whom she shared a bond beyond words, once said, "She carries the weight of the world, and somehow she still sings in the kitchen." That's who Meryl became. Not just the most awarded actress of our time, but a woman who learned that greatness doesn't always come from rising. Sometimes it comes from letting go. And when she turned 70, she didn't fear age. She embraced it. She called it a liberation. Because in growing older, Meryl didn't lose her power. She finally owned it, without having to perform it. So now, when you watch Meryl Streep walk across the screen, elegant, unshaken, eternal, remember this. Behind every powerful line she delivered was a silence she once endured. Behind every character she embodied was a girl who once stood in front of the mirror, asking the world to notice her. She never wanted to be worshipped. She only wanted to be understood. And maybe that's what made her great. Not the awards, not the fame, but the courage to feel everything and still keep going. She turned her pain into performance, her loneliness into light. She gave us stories, but more than that, she gave us pieces of her soul, wrapped in every role, whispered in every look. Now, at 70, she no longer seeks validation. She seeks truth. And in doing so, she reminds us of something quietly profound. What if our scars don't make us weak but real? So the next time you think of Meryl Streep, don't just remember the icon. Remember the woman who survived invisibility. The woman who spoke with her eyes when no one was listening. The woman who taught us that vulnerability is not weakness, it's legacy. If her story touched something in you, leave a comment. Not just for her, but for the parts of you that needed to hear this today.